Hello and welcome everybody. I'm glad you all made it because with today, with the ASLA Expo about a month away, we've got a thinker of a webinar for you. Be prepared to start looking at your own designs in a new way. We've got Megan Barnes with the Landscape Architecture Foundation covering today's topic on evaluating landscape performance. First, before we kind of get into that, our usual items for our live listeners. Today's webinar will be recorded and posted on our website at landeffects.com/webinars later today. You're going to want to ask questions today as soon as they pop into your head. So go ahead and find the Q&A button at the bottom of the webinar window and open that up right now so you're ready. If you want to toggle between full screen and windowed mode for this webinar, that control is at the top. What Megan is going to go through today is something I've been hearing more and more, that we as landscape architects need to be more responsible for evaluating and reporting the actual impacts of the designs that we build. How many times have you wished that you had the hard data to prove to a client that a sustainable idea was good for their bottom line as well as for society and the environment? I've been poring over the Landscape Architecture Foundation Landscape Performance Series website and documents kind of going into deciding to do this webinar, and this is, I've found, the right way to give hard facts to your clients, to officials, and to the public on tangible benefits of good sustainable design. So with that, I'm going to pass this over to Megan Barnes to tell you more about what they're trying to do over there trying to build and how you can join in.
Thank you, Amanda. So very happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to share this part of LAF work with everyone on the webinar. This is something we've been dedicated to for almost 10 years now. So I'm glad to share it with you all. My name is Megan Barnes. I'm the program manager for LAF's research programs, including case study investigation and the landscape performance series. I wanted to start out with a really brief background on LAF. So we are the Landscape Architecture Foundation. We're a 50-year-old nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. We were founded by leading landscape architects with really a sustainability mission to preserve, improve, and enhance the environment. And we work to increase the collective capacity of landscape architects to achieve this mission. Now, I say landscape architects, and of course that's in our name, but as you'll see today, our programs and our resources can support anyone who's interested in sustainability in the built environment. Planners, architects, industry, advocates, people working in land use or land management, local government officials, employees, really anyone. So what I'll share today is currently really used by professionals across the board, not just landscape architects. So to fulfill LAF's environmental mission, we invest in research, scholarship, and leadership programs, and they all are meant to increase the influence and impact of landscape architects. So we offer scholarships for students in landscape architecture and some other disciplines as well, so check it out. We run our signature Olmsted Scholars program, which recognizes leadership potential in students at university programs. And we also support leadership in landscape architecture through some of our kind of newer initiatives, our Fellowship for Innovation and Leadership, as well as awards programs. We really, for a long time, has served as thought leaders for the profession. So as a huge part of that, we hosted a summit in 2016, which brought together over 700 landscape architects and resulted in the creation of the new Landscape Declaration, which hopefully some of you have heard about. It's really just a one-page document that serves as a call to action for landscape architects to respond to the most pressing environmental issues of our time. That includes a lot of things, climate change, mass species extinction, inequity. It talks about our commitment to addressing those issues through our work as a profession who works with the land. So I would encourage you to take a look at the declaration online, sign it. You can also sign on at lafoundation.org. But today, however, we're going to tackle something a little different. We're going to dive in pretty deep on that first bucket, research, and really provide you with a good understanding and background of landscape performance and a walkthrough on how to really evaluate landscape performance for your own projects. So to start off at the beginning, what is landscape performance? Landscape performance can be defined as a measure of the effectiveness with which landscape solutions fulfill their intended purpose and contribute to sustainability. We hope the purpose is usually sustainability, equity, but really it's about measuring whether we are achieving what we think we are. So LAF became interested in this concept back in 2010 when we sort of realized that landscape architects and designers of the built outdoor environment generally weren't doing everything that they could to represent these really powerful environmental, social, and economic benefits of their work and that exemplary design can offer. So for example, there are a lot of claims in the green industry that, sustainable solutions plus good design can provide environmental benefits. We reduce urban heat island effect, we improve water quality, we sequester carbon. And of course, there's a lot of research out there supporting those things, but often not for specific built projects. And usually individual firms would not have a sense of whether their work was exactly achieving these other than, research showing that it should. So as designers, we really had to ask, are we really achieving what we say we are? So clearly, landscape architecture and landscape design has a really important role to play in sustainable practices, in green infrastructure implementation, and in achieving sustainability. First of all, there's really no one definition of sustainability. So there are a lot of ways to look at it, where sometimes we even get tired of the term, but there are a lot of different definitions. So there's that classic triple bottom line of environmental, social, and economic, and when all those factors are nailed, you get a sustainable place. That could also be quadruple bottom line if you include aesthetics, which many people do. And then, there's the living building challenge, just as one example, including a bit more holistic factors, looking at everything: materials, site, energy, water, indoor quality, beauty, and inspiration. That's for buildings. And then you have the One Planet principles, which were built on that. And they really more consider resource usage and sort of evaluate a system or a project based on its capacity to be supported with the resources that are available. So it's a really interesting concept. Please look it up if you're not familiar with it. But they have a really strong focus on zero waste, zero energy, all of those factors listed out there. There are probably, hundreds more ways that various entities, organizations, governments, nonprofits have spoken about and attempted to measure sustainability. But we do know one thing as landscape architects, and that's that sustainability cannot be achieved without considering the landscape. We know this. However, landscape is often undervalued in sustainability conversations and in the design and development processes. So sometimes it can be sort of considered something that's added on at the end as, window dressing, or it can be value engineered out at the end of the process without a lot of consequence. And that's where landscape performance really comes in, because we know how important our work is and how much we have to offer, especially as far as achieving sustainability goals. And sometimes that's not recognized by those that we work with. So measuring our impact and stating it clearly for other project stakeholders can help us show the value of what we're doing. Essentially, we should be doing much more to show the value of what we're doing and putting it in terms that speak to clients, developers, local governments, investors, the public, the list goes on. So here's an example. This is a building here in Washington, D.C. It was the first LEED Gold building in D.C. And if you Google it, in just a few minutes, you can come up with these concrete performance metrics. So the sustainable design of this LEED building reduces water use by 30% compared to a standard building. Carbon emissions are reported based on, renewable energy purchases. It's quantified. You can even get information about how much of the regularly occupied space has daylight. So getting at that employee happiness and some of that social benefit and productivity benefit. So all of this information being so readily available clearly demonstrates how this building is performing better than a standard traditional building. So through this example, we see that other professions have become a bit more adept at reporting project performance in terms of real benefits, which can often be translated into dollars. Now, when we looked at landscapes back in 2010, we saw a different picture. This is a sustainably designed streetscape, also here in DC. And when we saw projects like this, they were described in terms of features, not benefits. So when designers talk about sustainability in their work, sometimes they say things like, we added these great stormwater planters, or we used native plants, or we have LED light fixtures. And this is all great and a valuable way to talk about your work. But it really quickly becomes clear, without putting these things in terms of, water, energy, money saved, benefits, how can we clearly show the value of our work in the terms that other professionals and the rest of the world can understand? So as we know, a huge part of this major contrast between these two examples of the building and the streetscape is that buildings are closed systems, and it is a lot easier to monitor water, waste, and energy flow along with other metrics for buildings, while landscapes are really ever-changing, ever-evolving open systems in which benefits shift much more significantly over time and under varied conditions than those of a building do. So here we start out with features. That's not to say that designers weren't talking about their value at all. We did find many that were speaking in terms of benefits, but not quantifying them. So we call this making claims. So the fact that those stormwater planters are managing stormwater, but how? Or how much? Or that the urban heat island effect is reduced. Well, what does that feel like on the ground? Reducing potable water use. Well, how much and what's the cost savings? Things like that. Those are all ways that we've seen it communicated, but quantifications either measured or estimated or projected would not be provided. So this is an improvement from features to claims, but it's still missing a piece. Now this is where we want the profession to be, speaking in terms of measured benefits for projects. This streetscape captures and infiltrates 50% of all rain falling on sidewalks. It sequesters 3,000 pounds of carbon annually in tree biomass, reduced energy consumption by how much, and then what's the dollar value of that? Even looking at increasing restaurant patronage, and that could also have an economic impact as well that's not even quantified here. So what we really want to do is move the profession from talking about features and making claims to talking about benefits and metrics. And we've certainly seen a shift. We've been very lucky to see the needle move on this through 10 years of the Landscape Performance Series, which I'm going to share with you today. For example, when we first started out in 2010, if you Googled landscape performance, you would get something like Shakespeare in the Park, a performance in the landscape. But through this work, we've been able to change that drastically, and more firms are incorporating this in their work, and schools are teaching it. It's grown. We've seen the needle move. So I wanted to start out just sharing a few example projects and some more benefits to give you an idea about how powerful these really can be. And then we're going to go through the process of evaluating performance for an example project, which hopefully can help you start to think about doing it in your own work. And then I'll provide some resources to help you at the end. So for each of the projects I'm about to share, I'm just sharing a little tiny snapshot of them. There's much more on landscapeperformance.org for each of these case studies. You can dive in. So this is Historic Fourth Ward Park, Phase 1. It's in Atlanta, Georgia, along the very well-known Beltline. It's really significant. I wanted to share it just as an example of a stormwater management park, and particularly a stormwater management park in a fairly visible, changing neighborhood. So this was in the Fourth Ward of Atlanta, a historically underserved minority community, and it was subject to frequent and very significant flooding events that made the surrounding area completely undevelopable. So this park is designed to flood and manage really massive amounts of stormwater, up to 44 million gallons per day. And it's contributed to the catalyzation of over $2 billion worth of investment in the 6 block adjacent. This was determined through interviews with developers who said that they couldn't have even built here before the park's creation. Also importantly, in thinking about the neighborhood, the park provides park space in a really park poor area with local users within a 15-minute walk, demonstrably making use of the site. The next project is in New York City. It's basically a streetscape and park spanning the length of 8 city blocks. So this is Dutch Kills Green. It's at the end of the Queensboro Bridge, and it was sort of this tangled mess of transit where 3 subway lines, elevated routes, congested streets, a parking lot. It was a very dangerous and really disorienting pedestrian realm. So it is now a park. It has an improved traffic network, space for plants, space for bikes, and basically is a green corridor. And for this project, measured benefits include a really important one of, increasing bicycle traffic in a place that was really really unfriendly to bicyclists before. A huge one is that second one, helped reduce pedestrian and cyclist fatalities from a high of 18 to fewer than 1 per year. That really, you know, goes without saying, that's probably the most important benefit that this space could offer, is making things safer and saving lives. And then of course, increase in market value of surrounding properties. Now, as I give this presentation, I'll often get questions, so I'll get ahead of this question possibly, about how do you set metrics to quantify scenic value and aesthetics? It's tricky. This can be tough to quantify. This example from Lake Tahoe did a really good job of capturing the benefits of sort of this thoughtful design in terms of aesthetic value. So scenic quality for this project was of course important to protect views of the Carson Range around Lake Tahoe. So here, scenic quality was evaluated using the Tahoe Regional Travel Route Rating Scale, which is a local scale used to gauge the impact of proposed developments on the scenery. A lot of places have these local scales that can be used by landscape architects. So this project increased the scenic quality score from 7.5 to 14. So this allows for a quantifiable understanding of something that is very difficult to quantify. Reducing traffic and providing alternative forms of transportation were also a really important part of preserving that scenic value. So this was made possible by, you know, a consolidated transportation system that the design team suggested that unified public and private transit and let more people leave their cars at home, and that resulted in a 23% measured reduction in traffic. Finally, the project increased the total visible area of the natural environment by 10%. So for all those views of the Carson Range that were blocked by anything about the new development, the design created new views in other areas of the project site. So that was a net positive in the visible area of the Carson Range and a measurable benefit of this streetscape renovation. Vista Hermosa is another park located in a really park-poor area. It was the first public park built in Los Angeles, in the downtown, for over 100 years. So the park's neighboring community was primarily Latino, and they saw an increased average park acreage of 15%, which is a lot. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot for those living within a half-mile radius. The park's programs are both in English and Spanish, and they educate almost 1,500 visitors per year. Through citizen science, we also know that the site provides habitat for over 60 bird species within the Pacific Flyway corridor, right in downtown Los Angeles. The last project I wanted to share is Uptown Normal Circle in Normal, Illinois. So this is a park in a roundabout, and it was previously, you know, an uninspiring and somewhat dangerous for pedestrians intersection. And it really provides a gathering space downtown while addressing these safety needs. And basically improves safety for everyone, drivers, pedestrians. It eliminates costs associated with traffic circles, reduces traffic accidents, captures and reuses a significant amount of stormwater runoff. It serves as sort of a stormwater park. And then of course, increasing nearby property values, which is great in downtown Normal, Illinois. So before we dive into how you might approach talking about your work in this way and evaluating your own work in this way, we have to ask, why measure performance? What are the benefits of doing so? If you're not already convinced, I just wanted to go over a few more things. So we can measure performance for a few reasons. So we can do it to understand the performance of a system, which hopefully will lead to more effective management and inform incremental adjustments over time. So this is once your project's already built. We can measure it to demonstrate success, that we've successfully achieved our goals, achieved the impacts that we desired on a project, to show return on investment for environmental, social, or particularly economic factors. We can use performance evaluation to inform goals and design on future projects, just projects we haven't even thought of yet. Hopefully it makes our work stronger over time. And it can also help bridge the knowledge gap about the value that we have as landscape architects and the value of landscape solutions to help us educate clients, potential clients, local leaders, and the public. So overall, understanding the performance of built landscapes will lead to better future designs that utilize landscape solutions to their fullest potential. And we think this is an especially critical necessity as we face a world that is already greatly affected by impacts of climate change. So why metrics? So metrics are what we use to talk about our benefits, and they are defined as standards of measurement by which efficiency, performance, progress, or quality of a product or a site can be assessed. So there are many ways that we use metrics in landscape architecture to evaluate sites, both before and after construction. So first, of course, to inform a design. This is during the early phases of design. You're collecting data, doing an initial site survey, site visits. It informs what you do with your design. Another way that metrics are used in landscape architecture is to meet sustainable criteria. So programs such as LEED or sites, they set up specific standards and associated metrics for site performance in areas like waste, water, energy, and more. Another way that metrics are used is to show substantial completion. So when performance metrics are actually written into contracts to ensure that the project, or require that the project is delivered to a specific level of performance, even before it's delivered to the client. Another way that metrics are used, and the way that we're basically talking about today, is to evaluate the performance of a project. So this can be done to help firms learn and improve on future work, and all of the reasons to measure that I mentioned in the last slide. This movement of using metrics, monitoring performance within the design professions is not 100% new. However, it's gaining a lot of traction within landscape architecture, and it's really supported by larger trends of performance monitoring. So this includes a few things: new methods of adaptive management for site management professionals. There's a special credit, some of you might be familiar with, within the Sustainable Sites program for monitoring. There's a new platform within LEED that's called ARC, which actually provides up-to-the-moment performance tracking with an online dashboard for LEED certified buildings. And then, of course, an increased practice of site commissioning, similar to what I talked about in the last slide, the practice of having to deliver the project to the client with a specified level of performance. So a lot of these efforts have really been led by the U.S. General Services Administration. They're kind of leading the way on site commissioning and accountability for site performance. Now I'll dive into sort of the meat of today's presentation. I'm going to get a little bit in the weeds to help you envision this process. So when you want to start integrating what we think is a basic business practice of performance planning, monitoring, and evaluation in your work, where can you start? So I'm going to lead you through the process conceptually and then provide the resources at the end. So first, determining what to measure. So when you want to get started with metrics for landscape performance, it's really important before you dive right in to first identify the site of interest. It sounds simple, but it's not always. So this can be a project that maybe it's in the design process, which would be great, or possibly it's an already built site that you want to go back and evaluate. This is a really important distinction. So in an ideal world, all projects would be designed from the beginning with performance metrics in mind. And that's what we're telling you to do today. But since that's not always possible, and especially in the early years of CSI, that was not possible. Today, we're going to really sort of work with an already built project as an example, sort of reverse engineer the process to really illustrate the process clearly. So if you have a portfolio of built work, you want to identify the best potential built project to evaluate. At a high level, I would recommend the project with the most available information, and also the most enthusiastic client or partner to help you evaluate performance. They're essential partners in gathering this information. So I'm not going to go into more detail on that today. LAF offers a workshop, an in-person technical workshop on this, but the guidebook to evaluate performance that I'll share at the end is a helpful resource for you to iron all that out. So once you have a project identified, the geographic extent and context of the site you'll be evaluating must be clear. For example, if you want to evaluate stormwater, it's important to know the area of the site, its watershed, its larger context. Be sure to, clarify the geographic extent of the sites, consider location, context within larger systems. If it's a phased project, you decide, are you going to evaluate a specific phase or a specific part of the site? And then set a clear time period for evaluation. Are you starting when the project's doors opened on its first day after completion, or are you looking at a different period? This will help you have clarity going forward. Also consider what stakeholders might be involved on the site. So here's our example project. We're going to take this all the way through the process, although there will be a couple of other examples for illustrative purposes throughout. But this is Blue Hole Regional Park, and it's in Wimberley, Texas. And it was previously an existing park that was literally being loved to death. So years of informal recreational use had really caused its banks to become overrun, compacted. The native cypress trees that were there, that previously stabilized the banks, just couldn't grow anymore. So this site plan, which shows the final design, illustrates the geographic extent of the site and the various features that it accommodates. So we're going to dive into more detail on that project. So once your scope is clear, you can really dive into this process. So we're going to work through the process outlined here, which guides you through evaluating performance and choosing the right metrics. So first, in order to decide what to measure, you have to consider project goals, performance objectives, design intent, and expected outcomes. So what do those mean? Both at the beginning of the project and when you're evaluating it after it's built, you really need to know the project's goals. It's actually can be surprising sometimes that no one decided to write down goals. So this would be, what was the site originally meant to achieve? Usually the goals come from the client or owner side. They might be found in the RFP. They might be found in other documents that led to the project's creation. So some examples of project goals could include, generate all energy on site, or attract more visitors, after a retrofit, or generate more revenue for surrounding businesses. So we'll go into more detail about that. But performance objectives are a little bit different in that they really represent specific measurable objectives set by the client or the design team. So an example, often these are fulfilling a specific regulatory requirement, managing 100% of rainfall for a 5-year storm. Stormwater is usually one that has clear performance objectives. Another really critical thing to consider is design intent. So the design intent can be, of course, to achieve the project goals, but designers always bring something else into the mix. This part, is about the value add of designers. So maybe sustainability is not number one for the client. Maybe the client doesn't really care, but the designers might have it in their ethic as a firm, and they prioritized it and were able to save on operations and maintenance costs because of it. So that's sort of getting at that design intent. So these are the key elements, and these are things that if you don't evaluate against these goals, your assessment will absolutely miss the mark. So to wrap up with 2 other things you might want to consider, expected and unexpected outcomes. So for example, carbon sequestration might not have been one of the major goals for a project like, say, the Millennium Park in Chicago, but that project planted a significant number of trees, for nice shade and aesthetic value. And all of that plant material has a lot of other benefits beyond just shade. So you could quantify carbon sequestration even though it wasn't a primary goal, and it's still a benefit. Unexpected benefits are interesting. They often arise from unintended usage of the site that maybe the designers didn't even plan for. So maybe a park wasn't designed to specifically accommodate vendors, but maybe there's a significant economic benefit for the local community through informal food sales in the park. Even though that wasn't a goal, it wasn't designed for that, but it's still bringing a benefit to the community. So as you can imagine, if you're evaluating an already completed project, you're going to need to go back in time to dig to uncover clear goals for the project from the client and from the design and from your firm. If you're in the design phase, this is a good reminder to come up with concrete goals and performance objectives and design intent. Write these things down so that they can be evaluated once the project is complete. So all of those factors bundled together, which is just shorthand, I'll call them project goals, even though they include all these things. These need to correlate directly with what you decide to measure to show performance. So to illustrate what I mean, here's our example, Blue Hole Regional Park. So there on the side, you can see before and after images. The design team was challenged to not only revive and protect this place that was considered a local treasure, but protect it for the future, and also create a regional park that could accommodate more new visitors, new recreational amenities, but also not compromise the local ecosystems or the park's visual character, which was quite a challenge. So some goals for this project included protect the site while enhancing ecologically sensitive areas, including stabilizing the riverbanks, while still allowing for an increased visitorship. Economic sustainability was also really important for a really cash-strapped regional park system. So, construction methods were carefully, considered to reduce costs. So those are our goals for Blue Hole. So when we think about, what to measure, this is one useful tool that LAF has, and it's this list of potential benefits or categories, potential things that you might want to investigate. This comes from our guidebook to evaluate performance that I'll talk about again later. But for the moment, we're just going to take a look at this list of wide-ranging benefits of sustainable design and identify those that would be most relevant for our Blue Hole project goals. So what could we look at to get at that idea of not providing too much, not disturbing the site too much? We could look at land efficiency and preservation. For supporting those native plant communities and biodiversity, we could choose, habitat quality or populations and species richness. For visitorship, we can just lump that under, recreational, social value. And then for thinking about being cost conscious, we can look at construction cost savings. So again, for Blue Hole, you could look at all of these even, but those are the ones that we'll focus on just due to matching to the project goals. So those are all things that we might want to measure. And then I just wanted to introduce you to this table that you can use to take you through this process. So we'll work through this table. So here we've identified a general idea of what we want to measure. And I've plugged in 3 of those there. So I just wanted to quickly show 2 other examples to illustrate just some of the challenges inherent in attempting this sort of connection between project goals and what to measure. These are both also from the Landscape Performance Series. This is a project in Long Island, New York, and it was previously a residential, really highly disturbed site with a lot of invasive species. And the owners decided to develop it into a preserve open to visitors, and it also serves as a memorial dedicated to their son. So out of that came 2 really primary goals: restore and protect ecological communities, and then provide this safe, sort of peaceful, reflective place for visitors. And these really clearly lined up with the owner's priorities. If you go to the website for this park, it's pretty obvious that that's what this space is meant to be. So what we measured for these sites, I'm skipping a little bit ahead to show you what the metric is and what they measured. But for Avalon, it really made sense to look at, populations and species richness. So how can you measure biodiversity? And then habitat quality was another one. So looking at ecological integrity of the plant communities, that's that native versus invasive species. How that was improved on site, and then trying to get at that sort of restoration, that harmonious feeling that they wanted people to get. They looked at, how many visitors come there, but then also surveying them and asking, is your mood better? Was stress reduced by visiting this site for you? And so for this site, our research team was really able to get at those goals pretty successfully to show success. The next example of this is the Seattle Playgarden, and this actually illustrates some of the challenges in making sure that what you measure is directly related to project goals. So this was a playground designed specifically for children of all abilities to be able to play together in an inclusive play space. So because the designers, the contributors wanted to use really cutting edge ideas about child development, they also wanted to create, a therapeutic, sensory rich environment, and they were interested in sustainability and using it in environmental design solutions. So for Seattle Playground, a few of the benefits that we came up with was, evaluating stormwater management on site, that ecological ethos of being good neighbors. They looked at, yields of a fruit and vegetable garden. And then they also looked at, how many children benefited from outdoor education activities. So while these are all great, metrics for benefits of the site, you'll notice that something's really obviously missing. So it doesn't get at one of the really key goals for the project, that children of all abilities are able to play together here. And again, this is no fault of the researchers, and it actually doesn't mean that isn't happening on site. It was just the fact that it's not always possible to measure everything that you'd like to. It doesn't mean anything about the site. It just means that there are a lot of limitations, including availability of information, availability of personnel and time to evaluate certain metrics. And in this case, privacy issues and collecting data about children also may have been a pretty significant limitation. So in this case, the team was able to capture some of the benefits and still capture, some of the strengths of the project, but not all. So after seeing some of those metrics and how they really correlated closely or not to project goals, you should have a list of the different things that you're interested in measuring, at least a broad idea. So at this point, we need to start thinking about how to measure. So selecting metrics and then their associated methods. And this is moving down our handy, diagram. We're going to look down at potential metrics and methods for measuring. So we'll get to Blue Hole, but I did want to start out with a more straightforward example to illustrate what the process of selecting a metric looks like. This is a renovated parking lot. So before the renovation, the parking lot would significantly flood in rain events. This parking lot is used by local residents for overflow parking for guests, and it also hosts a farmer's market on weekends. Okay, so for this project, when we want to choose a metric, well, first of all, a clear goal of this project, flood control, right? We want this to show in some way that this site has provided a flood control benefit. So next, there are a lot of different ways to show that. There are many possible metrics for any given benefit. We could show an increase in flood storage capacity, a decrease in the number of flood events, decrease in time in areas submerged, decrease in cleanup costs, or increase in usability of the space. So how do you choose between these? There are several really key considerations when you're choosing a metric. So first, the availability of information. Is there baseline data available? This is kind of a no-brainer. It's really difficult or impossible to show performance with no baseline data. So in this case, if we don't know how often the site flooded before the redesign, we're going to have a tough time proving that the redesign has reduced the number of flood events per year. Another major consideration is purpose or audience for the metric. After you evaluate this benefit, who are you going to be talking to? Is it a developer, city hall, local residents? These groups all value different things. So for this project, if you wanted to demonstrate its success to the city, you may focus on that decrease in cleanup costs, since cost is huge for city officials. If you were talking to area residents, you might report decrease in time a parking lot is submerged, because then they're able to get their cars back into the space sooner. Residents and also vendors might appreciate an increase in the usability of space. So a metric there could be, the farmer's market was canceled or had to be canceled fewer times, however many fewer times than compared to previous years. So a third consideration is the resources available to you to evaluate any given metric. Basically the people, knowledge, equipment, expertise, time that's needed to evaluate a particular metric. And there's a lot there. I would, again, refer you to our guidebook to evaluate performance for more detail on this. So for this example, evaluating an increase in flood storage capacity will likely involve reviewing engineering documents or, even doing calculations yourself, which takes a higher level of knowledge and equipment. While decrease in cleanup costs could be easy. You could simply call up, City Hall to find out. Finally, defensibility is really key. So that's that the metric is valid for demonstrating the benefit that you're interested in. LAF's resources on this, which I'm going to share at the end, focus primarily on metrics that are relatively easy to evaluate in a short time frame and without significant specialized knowledge. They've been reviewed by academic researchers to ensure their defensibility. So as we all know, a 10-year longitudinal study on water quality would be a really great way to show the success of your project, but that is not possible for most people, and especially most firms. So we are here trying to provide metrics that are possible with much less and in a much shorter time frame, but that are still defensible. So for our example, Blue Hole, looking back at what we decided we want to measure, let's use land efficiency and preservation, as an example. So looking at not disturbing too much of the banks of the swimming hole. So when measuring this, there are some potential metrics here, the area of ecologically valuable features or land protected or left undisturbed, the amount of disturbance confined to previously developed portions of the site, or area of existing topography preserved. So for Blue Hole, the site was previously somewhat disturbed, but had very little actual infrastructure. So it would be sort of hard to gauge the redesign in the context of the amount of disturbance previously on site. The area of existing topography preserved would also take a bit more work in looking at construction documents and working with topo lines. So the first metric might be the most appropriate, simply using the site plan, construction documents, And you could use, GIS, aerial imagery, AutoCAD, whatever other tool to quantify just area that was not disturbed during construction. I won't go through each of these in detail, but I've added to this chart, selecting some metrics. So that one for land efficiency, but then also for recreational and social value. Very simple metric, change in visitorship, right? We wanted to show that visitorship increases even after the redesign. Construction cost savings, we could look at reduction in materials costs during construction. So now I just wanted to take a really quick pause to do a very quick little mental exercise and make sure you're awake. This is another example project. So you can kind of use your imagination with this one here, but it is a sustainably designed water sensitive residential development, multifamily development. And the sustainable development really has all the bells and whistles to help conserve water on site. So I want you to just take a few seconds to brainstorm some potential metrics that could help you show water conservation on site. So phrased in a different way, what could you measure to quantify that reduced water consumption on site? So go ahead and brainstorm to yourself for a second.
Maybe I can kind of participate
Sure.
too. I'm thinking things like change in permeable surface, maybe for looking at a Google Earth image before and after, or an aerial. That might be a good one.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Maybe if anybody wants to chime in, you can put that one in the chat box in the webinar to kind of share what you guys think you would put as possible metrics for this exercise.
All right. Let's see. Okay, so here's a few, and this is not an exhaustive list, but kind of the most basic one is just a reduction in consumption, right, of potable water. So this could obviously be done by comparing potable water use before construction versus after, which again, this would really only work if it was a retrofit of an existing subdivision. But if it was built on a greenfield, or if it had been a previous, been a different land use before, you could compare to a conventional subdivision's water use, a subdivision of the same number of units in the same region or the same city. Another thing, you could look at reduced water use due to plant selection and using drought tolerant plants. So yes, native plants are great. They don't need irrigation maybe after the establishment period, but you could actually, there are ways to estimate that actual savings. And you can do that by comparing to a conventional case. You could also look at irrigation data. So if there are, efficient irrigation systems on site, drip irrigation, you could compare, what you can use manufacturer information to estimate, how much is saved through the investment in that system. And then also, if water is being collected on site, like in cisterns, you could look at how much water is supplied by non-potable sources. So if rainwater or if gray water or black water is being collected on site. And of course, all of this can also be, put in terms of cost as well. So that's a big one. So once we know exactly, our metric, what we want to measure, the really big question, and unfortunately what I don't have enough time to dive into today, becomes how do we measure it? What do I do? How do I measure that? And these are our methods. So there are a lot of ways to approach quantifying the metrics. So I'm going to speak more generally. Fortunately, LAF has a lot of resources on this at the Landscape Performance Series. But here are a few generally useful ways to find data and ways to quantify benefits. So first, you can look at design parameters and information from rating submittals. So you obviously can always look back at your construction documents, et cetera, to quantify a lot of these things. That's a bit more of a predictive way of evaluating benefits, but it is valid. Rating system submittals often carries this type of information. You can use also, publicly available information. You would be really surprised how much is out there. There are a lot of sources, data collected by public agencies, business improvement districts, friends of groups for parks, real estate websites. tons of data out there. Social media data is kind of an emerging area that we've been looking at and that you can get more and more information from. Of course, you can use online calculators and tools. So this is more about estimating benefits. So you input the information about your specific site, and it'll sort of spit back an estimation. So an example of that would be iTree, which hopefully you've all heard of. If not, I recommend to give it a search. And that's a tool from the U.S. Forest Service that helps you to quantify the carbon sequestered, stormwater benefit, and more benefits of trees. And you just input the information about the trees on your site, and it'll estimate for you the benefits. That can also be found on the Landscape Performance series in the Benefits Toolkit, which has a lot of different calculators like this. Finally, conduct on-site measurements is often the first thing that comes to mind, you know, when people think about how they might go about quantifying some of their metrics. But yes, you can do on-site measurements for temperature, go out there with a thermometer. Water quality, you know, grab samples are relatively inexpensive and easy to do without a high level of expertise. And then of course, user counts and observations on site. These are often some of the most, you know, time-consuming and sometimes expensive ways to measure things. We would love if everything could be measured that way, but it's often not possible. However, LAF does recommend a few things that can be done on site. And actually the new ASLA Lattice guide on landscape performance also is a great source for some of those on-site measurements. Finally, of course, conducting user surveys. That's a huge one to understand many parts of a site's performance. So that could be in-person, you know, intercept surveys where people are walking by, or, you know, online or social media surveys for users. So overall, there's a lot of information out there. So just remember that data can really be found often even where you least expect it, and talking to your client is huge to understand what maybe they might already be collecting and you didn't know. So following through with our blue hole example, I've pulled out some methods and data sources to help us quantify these three benefits we're looking at. So to measure the area of ecologically valuable features protected or left undisturbed, we could use, you know, AutoCAD, area calculations. We could look at construction documents as our data source. For change in visitorship, we could look at visitor counts, pretty straightforward. We could get that from the local parks department, pretty straightforward. Reduction in materials costs. So the method could be looking at, you know, the acres of mulch that are created from, you know, shredding the invasive cedars that they actually took from the site. And we could find out about that from either the construction documents, we could go to the contractor to get a sense, to be able to quantify that metric, that reduction in materials costs. So to kind of start to finish up with this portion, here's a really important question. Once you have those metrics, how are you going to communicate them once you have them? Sometimes it's really beneficial to think about this at the beginning. So while some metrics really just stand on their own, others don't. So the benefit, or the metric at the bottom, it's really clear that any decision maker is going to get it. So tripling the value of the riverfront from $242 million to $722 million. This is really easy to understand. Dollar values, easy for decision makers. But a lot of metrics aren't quite so straightforward. And there are a lot of things that you can do to help make your metric more understandable. So you could report absolute and relative values, so such as percentages, like 95% of surveyed visitors agree that the park improves their quality of life. You could also use equivalencies, which could be something like, you know, manages 144 million gallons of stormwater. If I'm a layperson, I might not quite know what that means. But when you say equivalent to 218 Olympic-sized swimming pools, I get a little bit of a better sense. Another really common strategy is to monetize. That's probably the most common. So for example, you know, if you could report 11,000 cubic yards of crushed cement were reused on the site, which is, you know, great, materials reuse. But when you monetize it to say that this saved $97,000 in hauling costs, that becomes much more understandable and much more important, frankly, to a client or decision maker. You can also project out over time. So As we know, a newly planted tree doesn't sequester much carbon, but it really increases dramatically 10 years, 20 years down the road. So you can say, these trees sequester so much carbon now, but in 10 years, they will sequester X amount. Finally, and also very commonly, you can compare to the before or the traditional scenario. So that would be, saves 100,000 gallons of potable water annually with drought-tolerant plantings, as compared to conventional or traditional plantings. So comparison maybe of native grasses to turf to help people understand how much it's saving above a business as usual scenario. So to finish up with our chart, to go through how we're gonna talk about Blue Hole, you'll see some more examples of equivalencies that could be used. This will make a little bit more sense once you see the next slide, but first I wanted to show why I selected these particular equivalencies. So for land efficiency, percent of total site, which is pretty obvious, but sharing just the acres of protected land doesn't help because you might not know the size of the site. So when you say percentage, obviously it helps it be more understandable. For the visitorship, very straightforward, before versus after. It was a park before, so we're able to just compare before and after. For construction cost savings, that's where, if we just said, how many acres of mulch were made on site by those shredded cedars, that's not the most understandable to your average person. But when we give that dollar value of the mulch by not having to purchase and transport it to the site, that's a much better way to communicate that benefit. So here, finally, we have our completed benefits for Blue Hole Regional Park. This is where our research team ended up. So we have that Blue Hole's redesign protects 93 acres or 96% of the undisturbed area of the site. And also another great equivalency added here is that area was identified as potential habitat for 19 different endangered, threatened, or species of concern. So that just adds a little extra punch to our benefit as well. And then for visitorship, our comparison, simple before and after, increased visitation by 60% in the first year, generating, and then also adding in, how much entry fee revenue was generated, pretty significant number. In the second year, visitation nearly doubled again, generating another estimated $217,000. So that's really taking that visitation and sort of turning it up a notch, talking about entry fee revenue. Another sort of interesting thing about Blue Hole is that visitation was doubled by, they actually did not charge an entry fee before the redesign. So this is with the introduction of an entry fee, they still increased visitation by 60% in the first year. And then finally, those construction cost savings, using those, saving money on purchasing mulch for the site, saving $230,000. Which is pretty significant. So I'm going to wrap up today as promised by directing you to some of our resources that can help you really go through this process yourself. So the place that you can find these case studies and these resources is the Landscape Performance Series. So it's an online interactive set of resources that's supposed to help you quantify benefits, show value, and make the case for sustainable landscape solutions. We feature case studies, primarily that's sort of the best known area, but we have other really important tools there as well. So our Fast Fact library it provides snippets of information from published research. So we know that most practitioners do not have time to go reading academic journals, nor do they have access. Journals are very expensive, and typically once you're out of school, you no longer have access to those. So what we do is we find key facts from published peer-reviewed research, and we give you the little piece that's relevant to you. And they're all meant to help you make the case for sustainable design. So definitely browse through that Fast Fact library. The benefits toolkit, as I mentioned earlier, is where those calculators are. So calculators to help you estimate or measure performance benefits on your site. Collections, finally, are sort of playlists of content, themed content from the whole performance series, and they're curated by leading thinkers around mostly, current timely topics. So Hopefully, after listening to this whole presentation, you'll be motivated to go and explore the site. There's a lot to see there, and there's a lot to use to strengthen the way that you talk about and think about and evaluate your work. So obviously a really common question I get with this presentation is, I keep saying research teams, how do we figure out these benefits, metrics, and methods? How did we do all this? So our primary method for creating case studies since 2011 has been the Case Study Investigation Program, or CSI. So CSI is a unique research collaboration. It brings together faculty, a student research assistant, and a firm liaison. And they all work together to document an exemplary landscape project. And this is a built landscape project. The projects that I discussed all came from the CSI program. And this is meant to be, a research and training program for students. And as part of that, LAF provides a $9,000 stipend to the student research assistant to support them, as well as an honorarium for faculty. And these these teams, along with a firm liaison and design firm, do a really significant amount of legwork to document these case studies. It's not easy. It is a 6-month program, and the student research assistants actually work pretty much full time for several months during the summer. And really, the ultimate goal of this is to make sure that landscape performance is integrated throughout the design process from the very beginning. And we know that that starts in landscape architecture education, which is why we involve students. So since the pilot in 2011, we've produced over 150 case studies through CSI. We've brought together 67 research teams. A significant amount of participants have been trained in this program. It also offers a lot of benefits to the firm liaisons who participate. Their role is very much to provide background information on the project, on goals, especially as we talked about, initial intent, and to help the research team really dive in and evaluate the site. So the program runs from February to August, and actually the application process, which is competitive, is currently open for the 2020 program. So applications are due on November 1st. We're getting closer, but there's definitely still time if you're interested. Please look at lafoundation.org for more information. Feel free to contact me with any questions. As most everyone on here are firms, you would be applying in partnership with a faculty member who is near your proposed site or sites. Happy to give more information about that, though, if desired, and there's a lot on the website as well. And then finally, I want to wrap up with the resource that I keep plugging because it's great. Anyone can download this PDF free of charge, thanks to our sponsors. This is Evaluating Performance, a guidebook for metrics and methods selection. So this is sort of your cheat sheet to help you select metrics and methods to evaluate specific benefits. So the guidebook dives into all of those benefits that you saw before, environmental, social, and economic categories. You can easily, skip to the section that you're interested in to get some ideas. And the guidebook offers metrics, methods, positioning information, and examples to really help anyone make the case. They're meant to be understandable for decision makers, translatable for different audiences, like we touched on before. The methods described really help you evaluate performance, and they're meant to be easy to use, generally applicable, useful in a short time frame, as well as defensible, like we mentioned. This means that we really hope that anyone can evaluate, even without specialized knowledge or lots of time and equipment. And all of these methods have been vetted by academic researchers through the CSI program. So we're trying to recommend to you, the best methods on a limited capabilities. And the guidebook really guides you through the process, pretty much just like we went through, but in significantly more detail. So it has printable worksheets that can help you go through the process. And this one's for, identifying different project goals, looking at performance objectives, design intent, expected outcomes, as we went through before. And then their associated benefits, metrics, methods, and potential data sources. It's really just meant as, an idea generator to get you thinking about these things. So here's an example page for stormwater management. Each page provides background on the topic first, introduction, why is it important, assessment considerations about, scale, methods, how difficult will it be to evaluate, what's the time frame you might need, additional resources. My favorite part is that green box, our list of potential metrics. It's not exhaustive, but it definitely provides you somewhere to get started and what you can look at and then how you might quantify it. So with our methods below. And then each one, of course, provides an example from the landscape performance series. So how could you use this document? If your project's in the concept or design phase, you can use it to just help you think through the measurement protocols for what you might want to measure later and what baseline information you might need, right? Because if you don't gather it now, it'll be gone. It can also help you to set specific performance objectives by seeing what other sites have done and what's a reasonable, goal or target to set. If you're going back and evaluating built projects, it could be used to help you assess what could be measured based on your project goals and data availability. So, thinking about what you could or couldn't accomplish measuring. And then also discover metrics and methods for a particular type of benefit. So if you're interested in something in particular, you could get thinking about it. We want the guidebook really to be as much an idea generator as a how-to guide. It should do both. And again, you can download the guidebook on landscapeperformance.org just by entering your email. And so here's just a few key points for you to take away today. So how will you know that your work has been a success? How will you communicate it to clients? With landscape performance, on every project, think about how you will define success and write it down. This means considering the project goals, performance objectives, design intent, expected outcomes. One aspect that's surprisingly neglected sometimes is a before image. Take a picture of your site before construction begins. It's always surprising how few firms actually have strong before images. That's an important protocol to put in place to really show that transformation. Then think about how will you measure success once the project is built? What are you going to measure? Who's going to do it? When will this measurement happen? And what equipment will be needed? Under that whole umbrella is the thing that you really have to start thinking about now, which is what baseline data do you need to collect? What do you really need in order to show your impact, or what will you need after the project is complete? So hopefully that gives everyone an idea of where to start in evaluating landscape performance. Thanks again to the Landscape Performance Series sponsors, the JJR Roy Fund, Landscape Structures, and our promotion partner, the ASLA. So if you're interested in LAF's work and interested in landscape performance, you can sign up for our email list at lafoundation.org. And with that, a big thank you to LandFX for hosting me. And with that, I'll turn it back to Amanda, and I think we'll take some questions.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, that was a lot of information, but I think it was really, really great information, and I hope everybody was had some fun following along with that example. We have a lot of questions actually that came in, so we're going to be going through them. We added a bit more time on this webinar ahead of time. We kind of planned for this to be able to leave ample time for questions after the presentation. So thank you, Megan, for sticking around for answering all these questions. First, there were a lot of questions about the measuring. So I know you kind of went through this more towards the second half of the webinar, but there were some questions, especially from Elise and Doug, more about the differences between the quantified benefits that you were sharing, especially in your examples. Were they projected benefits, or were they truly measured post-occupancy? And maybe you can kind of talk to your standards for your case studies and how you make sure of those. Absolutely.
So I think the answer is that they're both and everything and all. Yeah. And the background for that is really just that when we started this in 2010, no one in landscape was really doing it, at least not in the way that we were talking about. So, it was our mantra at the time: start where you are. Start where you are, or if you wait until it's perfect, you'll never start. So we built the Landscape Performance Series on a lot of predictive methods. So using construction documents, using the design, using what the designers thought was going to happen to help report the benefits, and hopefully, ground truthing them and making sure that they were really, really working out. That is not always possible. So there are absolutely, especially in the early case studies, a lot of that. And also we recognize that for a lot of firms, using a calculator or making an estimation might be the best that they can do. So we provide all of that type of resources. Yes, also, a big part of the CSI program is to get that student out on site and measuring as much as possible. So all of our CSI teams, they do surveys specifically for CSI, pretty much all. If there's the ability to do temperature measurements or sound measurements on site, that's what we have them do. So ultimately, the answer is a mix, and that has been not because we are trying to do it perfectly, but it's because we were starting where we are and helping the profession to start to do this. And in some cases, yes, that means predictive methods or estimations.
Okay, and then I think those two questions were brought in around the time that you were talking about the Lake Tahoe Park Avenue project and the Fourth Ward Park project. Do you know those benefits in particular, if they were projected or measured?
Yeah, for historic Fourth Ward Park, that team was located nearby, so they did a lot of site visits. However, I think that all of the benefits that I shared on that particular slide were able to be done remotely. So stormwater, for example, looking at trunk sewer flows, that's not something that you can go out, and measure. It just isn't. So
yeah, take a big bucket.
Exactly. So that was projected, and then but for that one, some things that they did do on site, I believe they did temperature measurements. They definitely did an on-site interception survey to ask visitors what they thought. I actually think that the last benefit, about 44% of residents were from within a certain area. That was data that they went on site and they asked the people that were in the park where they were from. So.
Okay, and then we had one from Lad. He's asked, when you say increased property value, nearby property values by a certain amount, how do you know it is directly related? He asked, wouldn't it be better to simply say that property values increased by which the project contributed to, or is it actually such a direct measurable thing?
Yes, you're exactly correct. So usually our teams, there are massive firms like HR&A that get hired to do these types of economic analyses, right? We're not having our research team do something to that level. So yes, for a lot of sites, we have to say contributed to, X. For that one, we also, our teams look at sort of what's going on in the area, and if they can't find anything else that most likely contributed to that, they'll say, we think it was the park, and so they'll say, increased property values. However, I didn't actually go into this in as much detail, but if you're interested in sort of those types of details on how did they really do this and why are they phrasing it that way, each case study has a methods document. So if you click the download methods button on any case study, that will tell you the research team, their process, and it also includes limitations. So their big limitation usually on economic ones is, this might not be 100% attributable to the park. So we just know that the park did have something to do with this because of interviews as well as actually economic data that they do analyses of nearby properties and that's how they get those benefits. But yes, you are correct. Sometimes it is just contributed to.
Yeah, and if you guys haven't checked out that Landscape Performance Series website, just Google that phrase and you'll get there, and you can kind of search through all those case studies, and you can even filter them by the type of project that you're looking for, the benefits, all of that. So maybe even right after this webinar, just go through there and familiarize yourself with everything on that website. It's actually really, really beneficial information that you can use on even your current projects that you're on right now. There was another one here, Gavin asked, on average, how much does it cost, or a percentage of project cost, a client to track performance from the onset of the project through construction and going on tracking after completion? Now, I know that a lot of the case studies that you featured today, Megan, LAF does a grant program for a lot of those examples, and they were all a part of that, right?
Yes. Yeah, so first, I do not have the answer to that, and I guess I'll use this as an opportunity to say that I wish we did, and it's actually something that we're working toward. So we basically started out saying, well, no one's doing this really, so we've got to do it ourselves, right? So that's why we started CSI and offering these grants for students and faculty to do it. And some firms have had this in their DNA from the beginning, but most are somewhat new to it and integrating it. So the firms that I talk to now, especially smaller firms, they're looking for those clients who want to do this. So it would depend on the client, right? And obviously the site, but even for any specific example, I don't have a number. It would depend on how much the firm was able to absorb, how much, many firms are able to get grant funding from outside sources to support this kind of research on one of their projects. So it might not have to cost the client anything. It would just maybe cost the firm something, or they'd be able to fund it. That's a really big question that we at LAF are thinking about. And so we're working on a few things to source some information from those firms and clients that are doing this successfully. So that's a kind of keep us in mind, keep following us, because there's going to be, I think, some interesting
so it's more along an overhead cost for the landscape architecture firm itself.
It has to be at this time, unfortunately, mostly. And that's why supplying the faculty and the student is a really big help to help firms to do this. Huge, actually. So.
For the LAF grant, though, how does that process work to apply from the landscape architect's perspective?
Yeah, so the landscape architecture firm, if you had a project that you thought would be, a great candidate for this, maybe it's something that you thought about performance from the beginning. Those are great projects that we want in CSI, or maybe you didn't, but that has strong environmental, social, economic goals. You submit your own application to LAF through this CS case study investigation program, and then but you're required, and this was not required in past years, but this year it's required that you have a faculty member already identified as a partner, and they submit their own application, just listing you as a partner. But I will mention that for the CSI application process, I provide pretty significant support to applicants as far as letting you know whether your project might be competitive, or whether, if you're considering between a few, I can help you sort of narrow it down. And we even offer, if possible, I can attempt to match you with a researcher. We maintain a database of faculty who are interested in this around the country and around the world. So I can also sometimes help with that, the matching.
Yeah, and I just kind of wanted to chime in for everybody listening that it also kind of sounds like a lot of the firms who got grants and are doing this, they're also doing kind of more consistent, smaller evaluations using the same sort of methods for their own internal data that might not necessarily make it to the landscape performance series. So I would say that everybody, this would be a good kind of thing to even start practicing on a lot of your projects in order to become a really good candidate for that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was another question that Susan actually had, kind of a two-parter question then. Her initial question was more, do you have suggestions for, say, a Department of Transportation landscape evaluation for roadside treatments, such as water quality features and highway native revegetation performance metrics? Inspections and evaluations of the success for percent cover, for pollinator habitat, maintenance regimes. She said that I believe CDOT is California Department of Transportation is preparing a procedural directive to facilitate volunteer partner organizations. Oh, sorry, Colorado Department of Transportation facilitate volunteer partner organizations to perform valuable roadside revegetation projects like seeding, seed collection, and monitoring. So I guess she was kind of asking, like, are there maybe do you know of any case studies that might be really helpful already on the site? How might they go about that? Do you have any recommendations? And also, can state agencies like the Departments of Transportation apply for a research grant?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it gives me a chance to mention, we have a really wide range of typologies. We actually, off the top of my head, no, we do not have a great example for, transportation on that scale.
Yeah, I saw there was that transportation topic, but I don't think I saw any Department of Transportation in there.
Yeah, they're more small scale, streetscape improvements and things like that, bike lanes or greenways. But I'll use this as my chance to say, yes, we absolutely want that. I've seen some really exemplary sort of alternative highway treatment areas that I'd love to, you know, include in the landscape performance series. So that would be a case where I'd encourage application to CSI. And for the second question, you know, yes, this year actually we're being a little bit more explicit of opening up the process. So I say firm, design firm, but when I say that, you know, yes, agencies who have been intimately involved with the design of a place are also eligible. So it's okay if, you know, you don't have a traditional landscape architect on the project, or if you're not a traditional firm. Yes, departments of transportation, I would love to see an application coming from that area, because we recognize more and more, you know, that design firms provide this really essential service at the beginning, but sometimes they're not the ones, you know, they're not the ones that are collecting data, or they're able to collect data. So we need clients, we need, you know, the operators of these sites to be more involved. So yes, I would love to see that. And, you know, I'd say we typically stay away from making design recommendations, if that makes sense. We focus more on helping people to measure. So that's typically our expertise and what we're interested in. But yes, I'm glad to get that question, because these are things that we want to highlight in the performance series.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions that we had, and we've got a lot of thank yous coming in for you, Megan, from all of our attendees. There were a lot of people in today, and almost all of them stuck right through to the end. So that was really good. It's such an interesting topic. I want to thank you, Megan, on behalf of all our viewers in Land Effects today, for taking the time out to walk us through this important skill, I think.
All right, thank you so much, Amanda. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. That wraps up our webinar for today then, people. It's time for everybody to go out there and start thinking about how you can start measuring your current designs. Have fun. And I hope you all keep in touch on our forum, so let us know how you ended up using this. And I'm also looking forward to seeing more Land Effects users submitting their case studies to LAF. Thanks.